Okay, we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the causes of the Civil War and some of the things that immediately lead up to the Civil War. One of the things I'd like to talk a little bit about this time is something called the Dred Scott decision. It's a famous Supreme Court case that deals with the legality of slavery. And the situation was there was a slave by the name of Dred Scott who sues his master for his freedom. Basically, his master was a doctor who had taken him to several different free states, such as Illinois and things like that. And the assertion, the gist of his case was that while I was in those states, I was free because those states don't have slavery. So I couldn't have been a slave in those states. The Supreme Court ultimately rejects his court case, mostly on a technicality. It says that Dred Scott, as being a slave, can't be a citizen, so he doesn't have standing to bring the case in the first place. And so they kind of throw the court case out on a technicality, but they go further and say a couple of other things that really affect the atmosphere in our country. First, they say that slavery could in fact exist in the territories. So even though a territory might be a free territory, might not have official slavery, if somebody were to travel there, as in the case of Dred Scott's master, with a slave, that doesn't make that slave free. So slavery could in fact exist in a place that considered itself a free state. So again, they kind of reject out of hand the arguments that form the basis for Dred Scott's case. The North thought the decision was incredibly unfair. They thought that really Dred Scott didn't receive a fair trial on its merits because the court was made up primarily of Southerners, and so they'd already made up their minds. It's kind of similar to debates that you might hear today about the Supreme Court, that it's a conservative or liberal court, and so they tend to lean one way or the other. And to some extent, there's probably some merit to those arguments. The next thing that really kind of pushes the country over the edge is the economy. The North in 1857 was going through a pretty severe depression. The economy had worsened, and it was in fact worse in the North. The Northerners had more money to lose. They were wealthier, and so the depression hits them harder. The South feels this really vindicates their way of life. They didn't really feel the effects of the Depression that much. They were already poor, and they remained poor during the Depression of 1857. And so they feel like, hey, this kind of says that our way of life is better. Look, it hasn't affected us as much. Slavery is better. Agriculture is better. And the North is getting what they deserve because they're greedy. Next thing that happens are a series of debates that are called the Lincoln-Douglas debates between Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas. They were both running for president. Takes place in 1858. There are 7 debates in all, which is an extraordinary number of debates, actually. And the real issue of the debates was the expansion of slavery. These debates were widely covered. They were a national news story covered in newspapers all across the country. In fact, many newspapers published the transcripts of the debate word for word in their entirety. The two men themselves couldn't have been more different. In appearance and manner, Stephen Douglas was short. He was kind of stocky guy, as you can kind of see here. And he was eloquent. He was very good with words. Lincoln, on the other hand, was very tall and kind of gangly, and the way he moved kind of made him look awkward, although he too was very good with words, especially the written word. The views were also somewhat different. Lincoln would not have considered himself an abolitionist, but he did not approve of slavery. His opinion of slavery was that it must not spread. He wasn't ready to say that the South had to get rid of it, but he was ready to say that it had to stay in only those states. And the South fully realized, and actually so did Lincoln, that if slavery did not grow, if it stayed only in those states, it would eventually die. And so they were very much aware, both Lincoln and the South, that really this would be a death sentence for slavery, that slavery would end up dying away in the United States of America if it did not spread. Douglas, on the other hand, says, look, this is not an issue we even need to be talking about. This is an issue for the people of the individual states. He believed in something called popular sovereignty. He had advocated it for it in the Compromise of 1850. He had advocated for it in the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. He said this is really an issue of states' rights. Lincoln, he said, was an abolitionist, and he was really trying to pin that on Lincoln because he realized that would make Lincoln extremely unpopular in some areas of the country, especially the South. Douglas advocates for something called the Freeport Doctrine. He says, look, slavery can't exist without the laws to support it. He expresses this in Freeport, Illinois, for the first time. Thus, it's called the Freeport Doctrine. And so he says, look, if you don't want slavery in your state, you don't have the laws to support slavery. Slavery really can't exist in your state. And so because of that, even though Dred Scott, which a decision had already been made, said that, slavery, you couldn't deny it in the territories. He goes, if you don't have the laws to support slavery, to pin it up, it's going to fall apart. It can't possibly exist. So in fact, Dred Scott really doesn't matter, was his main point.